Hello, welcome live from the Ottawa Citizen and Ottawa Sun newsroom. City Hall reporter John Willing here with political columnist David Reevely, and we have been following the Ottawa municipal election results roll in here in the newsroom. And some surprises, actually, I think, across the city. Not so much in the mayoral race, I don't think, David. You've been watching the mayoral race specifically. Yeah. What do you think about that?
Well, I mean, I think it was pretty much the result we expected. Jim Watson re-elected with by any definition, a landslide, about 75% of the vote. Clive Doucette got 22 the last time I checked. There were still a couple of tabulators to come. After that, numbers fell right off. Bruce McConville was third with about 1.5% of the vote, and after that, a bunch of also-rans. Watson obviously did very well. If you're looking for tea leaves, did slightly worse than he did last time when Mike Maguire was his main challenger in 2014, but by any reasonable standard, a very comfortable margin for him this time.
You know, I wonder if Clive Doucette could have actually made better inroads if he started his campaign a long time ago, say in May when nominations opened. With 22%, I mean, that's not a bad showing for Doucette, but I wonder if he could have got that up a little bit more if he started earlier.
Well, I think this was Doucette's big problem was he began his campaign, and even he admitted later on he wasn't really serious. You know, he registered at the last minute because he had to in order to keep his options open. It was only when people who were going to vote for him, people who were supporting him, said that they really believed in him, that he realized, oh, I owe them something back, and so he decided to give it his all. But really, Ottawa's a pretty major city. If you want to win a race for mayor, you have to start early. You have to decide that you want it much earlier. Watson declared he was running for re-election a couple of years ago. Nominations didn't officially open until May, but anyone who was seriously looking to take him down, as you say, really had to start, probably last year. And I do think that a lot of people were looking for a different sort of a race. I think Paul Dewar was very interested in running for mayor. Hadn't quite made up his mind, but was very much leaning in that direction before he fell ill. And then after that, it didn't look like Watson was going to face much of a challenge at all. So that was why Doucette decided to get into it.
And I think just like in 2014, a lot of people are going to wonder if this is Mayor Watson's last term as mayor. I don't think we're going to start having that conversation maybe seriously for another 2 years. But I know a lot of people at City Hall, and we're down at City Hall, of course, David. You hear people talk about it all the time. Who's going to be around in 2022? And it's funny to talk about it already in 2018, but, you know, some long-standing councillors are thinking about what it would be like to be mayor, and I think this discussion will be happening.
Yeah, and I mean, Watson, to his credit, says that he owes people potential challengers or potential successors if he decides not to run. He owes them a relatively early declaration of that, which is what he did this past time. You know, people need a couple of years to get their ducks in a row, particularly if he's not going to run. I don't think he'd made up his mind definitely that he was going to run for a third term. I don't think as of today he's got his mind made up on, you know, having not even gotten final official results on whether he's going to run for a fourth. But I do think that we're going to have a pretty good idea in a couple of years, but well in advance of the next election, how things are going to shape up. The other thing is we're going to have to see how this term of council goes for him. And he's going to be facing a fair number of new people up there. Who are the ones that stand out for you?
Well, I mean, Carol Ann Meehan beating Michael Kakish down in Gloucester South Nepean. We have Sean Menard taking the Capital Award seat. And this is the one thing I've been thinking about all night, David, is how is Mayor Watson going to build some of these loyalties in some of these new councillors? I'm thinking about Jenna Sudds and Canada North, you know, and some of that, the part of council that's been very outspoken, specifically on social issues. I'm thinking about Jeff Leeper. I'm thinking about Catherine McKenney. I'm thinking about Toby Nussbaum. They're going to be bolstered by people like Sean Menard and Teresa Kavanagh, too. So I wonder if this term of council, the next 4 years, is going to be a little bit more raucous for Mayor Watson.
Yeah, I think that's very likely. I think, Jim Watson was reelected. I think as far as that's concerned, on the big question, it was a good night for him. A lot of councillors who were his allies either were not re-elected or people he hoped to get on council were not elected. There were, 3 sitting councillors running for re-election who lost. David Chernyshenko in Capital, Michael Kakish in Gloucester South Nepean, you mentioned defeated by Carol Ann Meehan, and Shad Kadri, particularly in Stittsville. 3 prominent councillors, 3 guys who have all worked pretty well with the mayor. Chernyshenko not as well as the other 2, but still generally seen as a compromiser, as someone who would make do what he had to do to generally stay on the mayor's good side. And 3 guys with positions of responsibility on council too. Chad Kadri has been chair of the Board of Health. David Chernyshenko has been chair of the Environment and Climate Change Committee, and Michael Kakish was given sort of special responsibility for dealing with the influx of refugees to Ottawa after the last federal election. So 3 people, to a greater or lesser extent, friendly with the mayor, 3 people with positions of responsibility, 3 guys who are out of a job.
And let's talk about the 4 wards that didn't have incumbents either. And Mayor Watson had some loyalties in those wards, in Bob Minette in Orleans, Jody Minnick in Innis, Marion Wilkinson in Canada North, and certainly Mark Taylor in Bay. I mean, Mark Taylor is the deputy mayor, and we're going to see some transition in those wards. We have Laura Dudas coming in Innis ward. She's a City Hall insider. She knows a lot of the players already. Jenna Suds, who's a business leader in Canada. Marianne Wilkinson's pick. I don't know what kind of relationship she has with Mayor Watson or will build with Mayor Watson. And Bay Ward, as we say, Teresa Kavanagh, who I'm interested to see that relationship between Teresa and Mayor Watson.
Yeah, and one of the things actually in several of those wards and a couple of others, there were people who I think you could fairly call Jim Watson loyalists or Jim Watson friends who were running, and they did not win. In Bay Ward, Don Dransfield, Watson said that he voted for him. He came second to Teresa Kavanagh, a very distant second. At last count, there was a fight between second and third there. And Kavanagh is married to Alex Cullen, who's a former councillor and certainly Watson's nemesis, at least on Twitter. The two of them do not get along at all. In College Ward, Ryan Kennery, who used to be Watson's press secretary, challenged Rick Shirelli, lost badly there. And in Canada North, where Jenna Suds won, Marianne Wilkinson, I wouldn't say has been a reliable ally of the mayor, but the mayor had a loyalist in David Gourley, who was running there to succeed Wilkinson, who was retiring. Wilkinson endorsed Suds, and Suds really mopped the floor with all the others.
Let's talk about the turnout for a second. We should say that all the results, of course, are unofficial. The city looks to make them official on Thursday, I think. But so far, we're looking at around a 42% turnout for the election, which is, I think notably better than the 39.9% from 2014. What do you make of this bit of an uptick in the turnout?
It's nothing to be proud of. Any turnout under 50% is not great. Local elections tend to have worse turnouts than provincial and federal ones, but you do see higher numbers when there's an exciting race for mayor, and that sort of activates people all around the city. The fact that turnout was as high as it was when there wasn't really a great race for mayor, that says to me that people are engaged. It's not as I say, it's not a fabulous number, but combine the number with the number of candidates who won who are not super friendly to the mayor, I think you might make a case that people are interested in some change. And we heard that from Clive Doucette in his concession speech at his what was billed as a victory party at his party. He said, he didn't win, but we gave Ottawa an agenda for change. And I think a number of the new councillors do reflect that.
One thing Mayor Watson will be thinking about right away, if he hasn't already, is putting together what we call his cabinet. It's kind of his de facto cabinet, his Finance and Economic Development Committee, which he traditionally has chaired. This is a committee with all the other committee chairs on it. That's why we call them kind of the cabinet, because all the important people are around the table. Who are you seeing as councillors with leadership positions in Watson's cabinet for the next 4 years?
I think it depends what sorts of loyalists he really looks around and sees that he has. I think he's likely not to have quite as good a relationship to council as we've been saying, and so he's probably going to want to have some loyalists chairing those committees. And the people he has to choose from, the list is not as long. I would be looking at Matthew Fleury, who is going to be starting his 3rd term as the councillor for Rideau Vanier, elected very young in his mid-20s, but he's got a lot of experience. Won handily, actually, despite some controversy there, particularly over the siting of the Salvation Army shelter in Vanier and the trouble with the additions to the Chateau Laurier, which arguably he mishandled. Didn't seem to have hurt him all that much at the ballot box. So I would say Fleury. I would say Stephen Blais, who has been very friendly to the mayor and has done extraordinarily well. I think he was re-elected with something like 89% of the vote. Just a huge number in Cumberland. Those would be 2 I would look at. Any names jump out to you?
Well, I do wonder if councillors like Catherine McKenney, who's got a ton of City Hall experience, remember she was a City Hall staffer before she was elected as a councillor. She certainly has the chops, I think, to lead a committee. It's a matter of which committee Mayor Watson would want her to chair, I think. They sometimes clash on some of their policy ideas. I do wonder if who's going to be deputy mayor. We have 2 deputy mayors traditionally. I do wonder if Matthew Fleury is going to be up for that role. You know, it's funny with deputy mayors. It's a lot of work, right? Because Mayor Watson keeps a heck of a schedule, so all those deputy mayors have to go to the bake sales and the ribbon cuttings and the presentations.
The ones Watson can't get to.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So it sometimes
dozens and dozens of them.
Yeah, and sometimes you hear from councillors saying, "Thank God I'm not deputy mayor because I don't want to go to a zillion bake sales in over 4 years." So I'm curious to see who he's going to choose as deputy mayors. For sure, one is going to be a fluently bilingual deputy mayor. Likely, if tradition dictates, one will come from the East End, one will come from the West End. And I think you're right. I think someone like Stephen Blais is going to be in a very senior position, maybe still as the head of the Transit Commission.
Yep.
We could talk about planning. I think planning issues will be very big over the next 4 years with the new official plan. We're going to talk about a transportation master plan. I think you can look to Jan Harder, probably leading the planning committee. I know she's been already jockeying to lead the planning committee in the next 4 years. So look her to return.
She has for the last 4 years as well. She would be continuing in that job.
That's right.
And it's a tough one too. There's a lot of paperwork and at the same time a lot of moneyed interest to deal with as well, which I think is a job that she actually quite enjoys.
We should talk about some of the big issues that are imminent for this city council. I mean, I'm thinking about marijuana right now, cannabis.
Yep.
They're going to have to decide, City Council is going to have to decide, I believe by January 22nd, around that time, whether they want storefronts in the city of Ottawa. What's your sense how they're going to vote on that?
I think there has not been a huge groundswell of people saying that, at least in the political class, saying that they want to ban marijuana dispensaries once they're properly licensed by the provincial government, want to ban them from Ottawa, which is a right the city has under the legislation. So I think they will probably vote to have them, but I imagine they're going to be pushing for a little more power from the provincial government on citing them and regulating them. Don't know how cooperative the province is going to be, but that's going to be a delicate issue for sure.
Yeah, I'm thinking the 2019 city budget, that's going to be, in an election year, it's a fast process to approve the budget. Mayor Watson will sit down with city manager Steve Kanalakis, city treasurer Marian Similik, and craft a draft 2019 budget. And Mayor Watson ran on a promise to keep tax increases between 2 and 3% with a heavy focus on infrastructure. So I expect the 2019 budget to talk a lot about fixing things.
Yeah, and Watson has given himself and the new council a little bit more room to maneuver. The budget tax hikes have been fixed at 2.5% and then 2%. He's willing to give a little bit this time around, up to 3%, he promised, because clearly the budget for a number of things has been starved. And he himself has talked about how the roads are crumbling and we need just to spend more money on infrastructure. Probably be a bit of a scramble among councillors for little teeny tiny pieces of that extra money. I think a big question will be whether this city council, the new city council, chooses to do what previous city councils have done and give Watson the authority to essentially approve the first draft of the budget and tie their hands as to whether or not they can raise taxes or move money from one piece of the budget to the other. Because he did that year by year in his first term, and then he managed to do it for 4 years in a row with one vote that I don't think councillors were looking for at the beginning of the last term. I think this time they'll be wise to that trick. We'll see whether councillors decide that the stability and discipline that Watson has promised and said this delivers, whether that's something they want to go for or whether they want to leave themselves a little more room to maneuver year by year as the budget comes. And I think actually how that decision goes, whether Watson tries to set that up again, and if he does, whether councillors decide to go for it, I think that'll tell us a lot about what the relationship will be between Watson and the new council very early on.
And I think it all speaks to Watson building those loyalties right away. You can expect some of those new councillors, if they haven't already received a call from Mayor Watson, getting a call very soon to try to feel each other out and try to see where they stand on some of his platform issues. You know, he's only one vote. A lot of people forget that the mayor's only one vote on a council of 24. So he has to get a majority of council to vote on his re-election platform. He'll be working to do that.
He has a lot of authority and a lot of influence, but when push really comes to shove, not as much power as you might think. And so we'll see whether he has that kind of influence and is willing to use it over the new city council that's probably not as friendly as the one that he's going to be saying goodbye to in a few weeks.
Yeah.
So it's a big night. The mayor hasn't changed, but a lot of the conditions he's working with really have. And it's going to be very interesting to see over the next few years how that all plays out.
Yeah, and stay tuned to OttawaCitizen.com and OttawaSun.com for all the coverage. We filed our stories already. They should be up on the website soon if they aren't already. So keep tabs to the websites. We'll bring you all
More is coming.
More is coming, all the municipal election coverage and fallout.